Detective Sarah Chun had seen her share of domestic violence calls in her 15 years on the force, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her at 247 Maple Street that cold October evening. The emergency dispatch had come in at 9:47 p.m. Neighbors reporting screaming and sounds of violence from the Rodriguez residence. As Sarah pulled up to the modest two-story home, the flashing red and blue lights from the ambulance already on scene painted the quiet, suburban street in an eerie carnival of colors. The front door hung open, its hinges damaged as if someone had forced their way either in or out. Sarah stepped carefully over the threshold, her hand instinctively resting on her service weapon, though she knew from the radio chatter that the suspect had already fled the scene. What greeted her inside made her stomach lurch with a mixture of professional concern and deeply personal anguish. The living room looked like a tornado had swept through it. The coffee table lay overturned, its glass top shattered into thousands of pieces that glittered like deadly diamonds across the hardwood floor. A lampshade hung at an impossible angle, casting twisted shadows on walls that bore the unmistakable dark stains of blood. Family photographs, smiling moments of happier times, lay scattered and torn among the debris. A child's colorful building. Blocks were mixed with the destruction, their cheerful primary colors a heartbreaking contrast to the violence that had unfolded here. Detective Chun called M.T. Rodriguez no relation to the victims, despite sharing the same surname, from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "We've got a female, approximately 32 years old, unconscious with severe head trauma. She's stable but critical. We need to get her to St. Mary's immediately." Sarah nodded, stepping carefully through the wreckage. As she made her way toward the back of the house, she could hear the EMTs working with practiced efficiency, their calm voices a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. But it was another sound that stopped her in her tracks, a soft, almost inaudible whimpering, coming from the master bedroom. Following the sound, Sarah pushed open the bedroom door to find more destruction. The mattress had been pulled halfway off the bed, dresser drawers yanked out, and their contents scattered. A woman's purse lay open, its contents spilled across the carpet. But the whimpering wasn't coming from the main part of the room. It was coming from the walk-in closet. Sarah approached slowly, her heart breaking as she realized what she was about to find. She gently pushed aside the hanging clothes and peered into the darkness of the closet's back corner. There, wedged between a laundry basket and the wall, sat 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez. The little girl was a heartbreaking sight. Her dark hair, which probably usually hung in neat pigtails, was disheveled and matted. She wore pink pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns, but they were stained and torn. In her tiny arms, she clutched a stuffed teddy bear that had clearly seen better days. One arm was nearly torn off, and stuffing peeked through several holes in its brown fur. But it was Emma's eyes that would haunt Sarah for months to come. Those wide, dark brown eyes held a depth of fear and confusion that no child should ever experience. They were the eyes of someone who had witnessed something terrible, something that had shattered her innocent world into pieces as surely as the glass table in the living room had been shattered. When Emma saw Sarah, she didn't run to her for comfort as most children would to a uniformed adult promising help. Instead, she pressed herself even further back into the corner, making herself as small as possible, as if she could disappear entirely into the shadows. "Hi there, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, crouching down to make herself less intimidating. She had taken specialized training in dealing with child witnesses and victims, but all the training in the world couldn't prepare you for the reality of a traumatized toddler. "My name is Sarah. I'm a police officer, and I'm here to help you. You're safe now, okay?" Emma's response was to clutch her damaged teddy bear even tighter and let out another small whimper. Her eyes darted toward the bedroom door, as if expecting someone terrible to appear at any moment. Sarah could see the child's whole body trembling, and her heart ached for this innocent victim who had been thrust into an adult nightmare. "I know you're scared, honey," Sarah continued, her voice gentle and soothing. "But the person who hurt your mommy is gone now. You don't have to hide anymore. Can you come out and talk to me?" But Emma only shook her head almost imperceptibly and pressed her face against her teddy bear, as if the warm toy could protect her from all the horrors she had witnessed. Sarah could hear the EMTs in the background, preparing to transport Maria Rodriguez to the hospital. Time was of the essence, not just for Maria's medical needs, but for preserving whatever evidence might exist in Emma's young mind. "Ma'am?" Officer Jenkins appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "We've got the scene secured, and we've put out a bolo for Carlos Rodriguez. Neighbors say they saw him leave in a blue Ford pickup about 20 minutes before we arrived. Also, child services is en route." Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on the terrified child in front of her. She had dealt with many witnesses over the years, but children presented unique challenges. They often saw things adults missed, noticed details that could be crucial to solving a case. But they also processed trauma differently, sometimes shutting down completely or mixing reality with imagination in ways that could complicate prosecution. As Sarah continued to speak softly to Emma, trying to coax her out of her hiding place, she realized that this little girl held the key to everything. Whatever had happened in this house tonight, Emma had seen it all. The question was whether they would ever be able to unlock the secrets trapped behind those frightened brown eyes, or if Emma's silence would allow a potentially dangerous man to escape justice. The path to truth would prove to be longer and more extraordinary than anyone in that damaged house could possibly imagine. District Attorney Michael Torres sat in his corner office 3 weeks after the Rodriguez incident, surrounded by case files that seemed to mock him from every surface. The morning sun streamed through his windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like his hopes for a successful prosecution present, but ultimately insubstantial. He rubbed his tired eyes and reached for his 4th cup of coffee, knowing that caffeine wouldn't solve the impossible puzzle that had become the People versus Carlos Rodriguez. The evidence photos spread across his mahogany desk told a story of violence that should have been straightforward. Blood spatter analysis, fingerprints, DNA evidence, all of it pointed to Carlos Rodriguez as the perpetrator of a brutal assault on his wife, Maria. The man had been arrested 12 hours after the incident, found passed out drunk in his truck at a rest stop 40 miles outside the city. When officers approached him, he'd immediately confessed to hitting his wife, claiming self-defense in slurred, alcohol-soaked words. "She came at me with a knife," Carlos had mumbled during his initial interrogation, the video of which Torres had watched dozens of times. "I was just trying to protect myself. I didn't mean to hurt her so bad." But no knife had been found at the scene, and the pattern of injuries on Maria's unconscious body suggested a sustained, one-sided attack rather than a struggle between two combatants. Under normal circumstances, this would be a prosecutor's dream case. Clear evidence, a confession, and devastating injuries that would make any jury sympathetic to the victim. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Torres knew it. The case hinged on one critical factor that made everything infinitely complicated. The only reliable witness was a 3-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a word about that night to anyone. A soft knock on his door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, and Detective Sarah Chon entered, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the same frustrated expression that Torres felt etched on his own face. "Any updates on Emma?" Torres asked hopefully, though Chun's expression already provided the answer. "I just came from another session with Dr. Foster and the child psychologist team," Chun said, settling into the chair across from his desk. It's been 3 weeks, Mike, and Emma still won't talk about that night. She's making progress in other ways. She's talking to her grandmother, playing with other children at daycare, even laughing sometimes. But the moment anyone asks about her father or what happened to her mother, she just shuts down completely. Torres opened the folder Chun had brought, revealing page after page of psychological evaluations, interview transcripts filled with subject remained non-responsive, and child development assessments. Dr. Amanda Foster, the city's leading expert in childhood trauma, had painted a picture of a deeply intelligent little girl whose mind had essentially built walls around the memories of that terrible night. Dr. Foster believes Emma remembers everything, Chun continued. She says children Emma's age often have remarkable recall for traumatic events, sometimes even more detailed than adult witnesses. But the trauma response has created what she calls a protective silence. Emma's psyche is shielding her from having to relive those memories. And Rebecca Nash is having a field day with this, Torres muttered, referring to Carlos Rodriguez's defense attorney. Nash had already filed 3 motions challenging the admissibility of any potential testimony from Emma, citing her age, her trauma, and her refusal to speak as evidence that anything she might eventually say would be unreliable and prejudicial. Torres pulled out Nash's latest brief, its legal arguments as sharp as a scalpel. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "The prosecution seeks to base their entire case on the potential testimony of a traumatized 3-year-old who has demonstrated clear signs of psychological disturbance and selective mutism. No court should allow the liberty of an American citizen to depend on the confused recollections of a child who cannot distinguish between reality and the nightmares that surely plague her sleep." "She's not wrong about the legal challenges," Chun admitted, reluctantly. "Even if Emma does start talking, any defense attorney worth their salt will tear apart testimony from someone that young. And with Maria still in a coma," Torres finished grimly. Maria Rodriguez had been transferred to the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital, where she remained in a medically induced coma while her brain struggled to heal from the severe trauma. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her chances for recovery, but even if she woke up tomorrow, there was no guarantee she would remember the attack or be able to testify coherently about what happened. Torres stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the courthouse steps where reporters still gathered daily, hoping for updates on what the media had dubbed the silent witness case. The public attention only added pressure to an already impossible situation. The mayor's office called twice a day asking for updates. The police chief wanted to know why they couldn't get a 3-year-old to talk. Even Torres's own boss, the elected district attorney, had started making pointed comments about conviction rates and public confidence in the justice system. "There's something else," Chun said quietly. "Carlos's mother called me yesterday. She's desperate to see Emma. Says the little girl is her only grandchild and that Carlos would never hurt his family. She claims there's more to the story than we know." "Of course she does. Every defendant's family says that." Torres turned back to his desk, but Chun's words nagged at him. In his 20 years as a prosecutor, he'd learned to trust his instincts. And something about this case felt incomplete. The evidence was solid, the confession clear, but there were small details that didn't quite fit the narrative. "What if Carlos's mother is right?" Chun asked, voicing the doubt that had been growing in Torres's mind. "What if there is more to this story? What if Emma's silence isn't just about trauma? What if she's protecting someone or hiding something that could change everything?" Torres looked at the crime scene photos again, this time with fresh eyes. In one corner of a photograph showing the destroyed living room, he noticed Emma's coloring books scattered among the debris. One page was still attached, showing a child's drawing of a family stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. A happy family that had been shattered in one violent night. "We need to find a way to reach Emma," Torres said finally. "Because right now, she's our only hope for the truth. And if we can't unlock whatever secrets she's carrying, a potentially dangerous man walks free. Or," he paused, considering the alternative that had begun to worry him, "or we convict an innocent man of a crime we don't fully understand." The impossible case was about to become even more complicated. Officer Mark Sullivan had always believed that some partnerships transcend the ordinary bonds between humans, but even he was amazed by the profound connection he shared with his four-legged partner. Rex, a magnificent German shepherd with amber eyes that seemed to peer directly into human souls, had been Sullivan's partner for 6 years. Together, they had walked through the darkest moments of human experience, bringing comfort to victims of unspeakable crimes and helping shattered lives begin to heal. The call from the district attorney's office had come on a crisp November morning, 2 weeks after the Rodriguez case had begun consuming headlines. Sullivan was in the middle of Rex's morning training routine at the police department's canine facility when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Dia Torres. The request was unprecedented. Could Rex help a 3-year-old witness find her voice in what might be the most important testimony of the decade? Sullivan's mind immediately went to Rex's remarkable history. The German Shepherd wasn't just any therapy dog. He was a graduate of the Elite Canine Companions for Courage program, specially trained to work with trauma victims. Rex had been barely 2 years old when he first demonstrated his extraordinary gift during a training exercise. A young rape victim who had been unable to speak to investigators for months suddenly began telling her story while stroking Rex's soft fur, her words flowing like water through a broken dam. Since then, Rex had worked with dozens of victims, elderly fraud targets who found courage in his steady presence, domestic violence survivors who whispered their stories to his attentive ears, and children who saw in his gentle brown eyes safety they couldn't find anywhere else. But a 3-year-old witness in a potential murder case? This would test every skill Rex had learned. Judge Williams has agreed to allow Rex in the courtroom, Torres explained during their meeting at the courthouse. But we need to be absolutely certain this will work. Dr. Foster has been trying for 3 weeks to get Emma to talk about that night, and we're running out of time. Carlos Rodriguez's preliminary hearing is in 10 days, and if we can present compelling evidence of his guilt, he might be released on bail. Dr. Amanda Foster, the child psychologist overseeing Emma's care, sat across from Sullivan in the conference room, her expression a mixture of hope and professional skepticism. "I've worked with therapy animals before, but never in a legal context this sensitive. Emma has been making progress in general therapy. She's sleeping better, eating normally, even playing with other children at daycare. But the moment anyone mentions her father or asks about the night Mommy got hurt, she becomes completely non-responsive." "What exactly does non-responsive mean?" Sullivan asked, absently stroking Rex's head as the dog sat perfectly still beside his chair, as if sensing the gravity of the conversation. "She doesn't just refuse to answer," Dr. Foster explained. "She literally retreats into herself. Her body language becomes defensive. She starts humming or singing to herself to block out our voices. And sometimes she even closes her eyes and rocks back and forth. It's a classic trauma response. Her mind is protecting her from memories that are too painful to process." Sullivan studied the photographs of Emma that Torres had provided. Even in the pictures taken before the incident, birthday parties, family outings, everyday moments of childhood joy, there was something special about her eyes. They held an intelligence and awareness that seemed beyond her 3 years, the kind of perceptive depth that made some children natural witnesses to the adult world around them. "Rex has worked with several children Emma's age," Sullivan said, thoughtfully. There's something about the way he interacts with young kids that's different from his work with adult victims. Children don't have the same barriers adults do. They don't worry about looking foolish or weak when they talk to a dog. To them, Rex isn't a therapy animal or a police dog. He's just a friend who listens without judgment. Torres leaned forward, eagerly. Do you think he can reach her? I think Rex can create a space where Emma feels safe enough to remember, Sullivan replied carefully. But you need to understand something important. Rex doesn't make people talk. He simply makes them feel secure enough to speak their truth. If Emma tells us something while she's with Rex, it won't be because he convinced her or coached her. It will be because she finally feels safe enough to let those memories surface. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of environment Emma needs. No pressure, no formal interrogation, just a safe space where she can process her trauma at her own pace. A plan they developed was simple but revolutionary. Rather than forcing Emma into a traditional interview setting, they would arrange several informal meetings where she could simply spend time with Rex. No cameras, no formal questions, no court reporters, just a little girl, a gentle dog, and adults who would be present but not intrusive. The first meeting is crucial, Dr. Foster explained as they prepared to implement their plan. Emma needs to bond with Rex before we can even think about introducing any legal elements. She needs to see him as her friend, not as another tool the adults are using to make her remember scary things. Sullivan looked down at Rex, who had been listening to the entire conversation with the focused attention that made him such an exceptional therapy dog. The German Shepherd's ears were alert, his eyes bright and aware, as if he understood the importance of what they were asking him to do. What do you think, partner? Sullivan asked quietly. Ready to help a little girl find her voice? Rex responded, with a soft whine and a gentle tail wag, his body language conveying the calm confidence that had made him legendary among victim services personnel. He had worked miracles before, but this case would require something even more extraordinary. As they prepared to meet Emma Rodriguez for the first time, Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to embark on something that would change not just this case, but the entire way the justice system approached traumatized child witnesses. Rex had always been special, but Sullivan sensed that his greatest achievement still lay ahead. The unlikely hero was about to meet the tiny witness whose silence held the key to justice. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over her courtroom for 28 years, witnessing everything from capital murder trials to custody disputes that tore families apart. She had seen hardened criminals break down in tears, watched lawyers present evidence that changed the course of history, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But nothing in her distinguished career had prepared her for the extraordinary scene unfolding before her on this December morning. The courtroom itself had been transformed for this unprecedented hearing. Gone were the imposing wooden barriers that typically separated witnesses from the gallery. In their place, child psychologist Dr. Foster had worked with court personnel to create what she called a comfort zone, a carpeted area with soft lighting, child-sized furniture, and even a small bookshelf filled with picture books. The formal witness stand had been replaced with a comfortable armchair positioned at an angle that would allow Emma to see friendly faces while avoiding direct eye contact with anyone who might intimidate her. Judge Williams adjusted her reading glasses and looked over the unusual assembly before her. Da Torres sat at the prosecution table, his usually confident demeanor tempered by obvious nervousness. Defense attorney Rebecca Nash occupied the opposing counsel's table, her legal briefs stacked high with objections she was prepared to raise at a moment's notice. Court reporter Lisa Chong had positioned herself closer than usual, understanding that she might need to strain to hear whatever words a frightened 3-year-old might whisper. But it was the gallery that truly reflected how extraordinary this moment was. typically packed with spectators, journalists, and law students eager to observe high-profile cases. Today, it held only a handful of essential personnel. Emma's grandmother, Rosa Martinez, sat in the front row, her weathered hands clasped tightly in prayer. Dr. Foster occupied a seat nearby, ready to intervene if Emma showed signs of distress. Even the court bailiffs had been specially briefed on how to move quietly and avoid any sudden gestures that might startle a traumatized child. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a soft creak that seemed amplified in the unusual silence. Officer Mark Sullivan entered first, his uniform pressed, and his bearing professional, despite the unprecedented nature of what he was about to facilitate. Behind him walked a sight that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Rex padded into the courtroom with the quiet dignity that had made him legendary among victim services personnel. His black and tan coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his amber eyes surveyed the room with intelligent awareness. The German Shepherd's presence seemed to fill the space with a calm energy that even the most skeptical observers could feel. Several of the court staff, who had initially questioned whether a dog belonged in their formal legal environment, found themselves unexpectedly moved by the grace and nobility of this unlikely participant in the pursuit of justice. But it was the tiny figure walking between Officer Sullivan and Rex that truly transformed the courtroom from a place of intimidating legal proceedings into something resembling a sanctuary. 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez looked impossibly small. In the vast space, her hand dwarfed by Officer Sullivan's larger one, her free hand occasionally reaching down to touch Rex's head as if drawing strength from the contact. Emma wore a simple purple dress that her grandmother had chosen because it was her favorite color, along with white tights and small black shoes that clicked softly against the marble floor. Her dark hair had been braided with care, adorned with a small butterfly clip that caught the light as she moved. In her arm, she carried the same damaged teddy bear that Detective Chen had found her clutching in the closet that terrible night, a constant companion that provided comfort in a world that had suddenly become frighteningly unpredictable. Judge Williams felt her professional composure waver as she watched the small procession approach the witness area. Emma's eyes, those same dark brown eyes that had haunted Detective Chen's dreams, darted nervously around the courtroom, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. When her gaze landed on her grandmother Rosa, a small smile flickered across her face, the first sign of recognition and comfort in this intimidating environment. "Good morning, Emma," Judge Williams said softly, her voice gentler than any of the attorneys had ever heard it. "My name is Judge Williams, and I'm very glad you came to visit us today. This is my courtroom, where we try to help people solve problems and find answers to important questions." Emma's response was to press closer to Rex, her small hand burying itself in the thick fur of his neck. The German Shepherd seemed to sense her nervousness and responded by sitting perfectly still, becoming a living pillar of stability for the frightened child. His training was evident in every aspect of his behavior. He remained alert and responsive to Emma's needs while completely ignoring the dozens of adult eyes focused on him. Officer Sullivan guided Emma to the specially prepared seating area, and she settled into the child-sized armchair with Rex positioned directly beside her. The dog arranged himself so that Emma could easily reach him while still being visible. To the court, Dr. Foster had explained that this positioning was crucial. Emma needed to feel that Rex was her ally and protector, not just another element of the formal legal proceeding. Torres stood slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He had spent hours preparing for this moment, consulting with child psychology experts about how to approach such a young witness. Every word had been chosen carefully, every gesture considered for its potential impact on a traumatized 3-year-old, who held the key to justice in her fragile memory. "Hello, Emma," Torres said, his voice warm and friendly. "Thank you for coming to see us today. I see you brought your teddy bear and your friend Rex. They both look very nice." Emma's eyes flicked toward Torres briefly before returning to Rex's comforting presence. She whispered something to the dog, words too quiet for anyone else to hear, and Rex's ears twitched slightly in response, as if he was actually listening to her secrets. The courtroom held its collective breath, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a delicate dance between justice and healing, between the need for truth and the protection of innocence. Everyone present sensed that whatever happened in the next few minutes would not only determine the fate of Carlos Rodriguez, but would also set new precedents for how the legal system approached its most vulnerable witnesses. The transformation was complete. The formal courtroom had become a space where a little girl might finally feel safe enough to speak the truth that everyone desperately needed to hear. The silence in the courtroom was so profound that the soft hum of the ventilation system seemed thunderous. Torres had been speaking gently with Emma for nearly 10 minutes, his questions carefully crafted to be non-threatening and age-appropriate. He had asked about her favorite colors, purple and pink, her toys, especially her teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, and her grandmother's cooking. She loved Rose's homemade cookies. Emma had responded to these safe topics with shy nods and occasional whispered single-word answers, her voice barely audible even in the acoustically designed courtroom. But the moment Torres gently steered the conversation toward her family, Emma's demeanor changed completely. Her small body tensed, her grip on Mr. Buttons tightened, and those expressive dark eyes that had begun to show sparks of curiosity suddenly went blank, as if someone had drawn curtains across windows that had briefly let in light. "Emma, can you tell us about your mommy?" Torres asked softly, his voice carrying the practiced gentleness of someone who had spent years learning how to approach traumatized witnesses. "I know you love your mommy very much." Emma's response was to turn away from Torres entirely, sliding down in her chair until she was practically kneeling on the floor beside Rex. She buried her face in the German Shepherd's thick fur, her small shoulders beginning to shake with barely contained emotion. Judge Williams leaned forward in concern, ready to call a recess if the child became too distressed. Dr. Foster, watching from the gallery, recognized the signs immediately. Emma was retreating into the protective silence that had shielded her. For weeks, the psychological walls that her young mind had constructed to keep the terrible memories at bay. But instead of the complete shutdown they had witnessed in previous sessions, something different was happening. Emma's lips were moving against Rex's fur, and soft sounds were emerging, not the humming or singing she typically used to block out difficult questions, but actual words. Court reporter Lisa Chong strained to hear, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, but the words were too quiet and muffled for her to capture. Officer Sullivan, positioned closest to Emma and Rex, tilted his head slightly, trying to make out what the little girl was saying to his partner. Rex, for his part, remained perfectly still, his ears attentive and his amber eyes focused entirely on Emma, as if he was indeed listening to every word she whispered. "Daddy was sad that night," Emma murmured into Rex's fur, her voice so soft that only Sullivan could hear clearly. "He was crying like when I cry when I have bad dreams." Torres stopped mid-sentence, realizing that something extraordinary was happening. The formal questioning had failed, but Emma was voluntarily sharing information with Rex in a way that felt natural and unforced to her. He caught Judge Williams' eye and made a subtle gesture, asking permission to remain silent and let this unexpected development unfold. Emma lifted her head slightly from Rex's neck, her tear-filled eyes looking directly into the dog's gentle gaze. "The scary men called on the phone again," she continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she found comfort in Rex's unwavering attention. Daddy said bad words when they talked to him. Really bad words that made Mommy upset. The courtroom was electrified. Defense attorney Rebecca Nash half rose from her chair, clearly wanting to object to this unconventional testimony. But Judge Williams raised a subtle hand, warning her to remain silent. This wasn't formal testimony yet. Was a traumatized child, processing her memories in the only way she felt safe to do so. Rex, the scary man, said they would hurt me and Mommy if Daddy didn't give them lots and lots of money. Emma continued, her small hand stroking the dog's head with unconscious rhythm. But Daddy said we didn't have lots of money because Mommy was sick before, and the doctor money was all gone. Sullivan's pulse quickened as he began to understand the implications of what Emma was revealing. This wasn't the simple domestic violence case everyone had assumed. Emma was describing threats, financial pressure, and desperation elements that could completely change the legal landscape of Carlos Rodriguez's prosecution. Emma's voice grew clearer as she continued her conversation with Rex, the words flowing more freely than they had in weeks. Daddy was scared, Rex. Really, really scared. He kept looking out the windows and checking the locks on the doors. He said the bad men knew where we lived, and they might come to our house. Da Torres felt his carefully constructed case beginning to shift beneath him like sand. Every word from Emma's lips was painting a picture vastly different from the straightforward domestic violence scenario he had been preparing to prosecute. Instead of a husband who had simply lost his temper and attacked his wife, Emma was describing a man under extreme duress, terrorized by unknown threats against his family. That night, Daddy was walking around and around the house. Emma continued, her voice taking on the sing-song quality that children often use when recounting events. He kept saying, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" and pulling his hair like this. She demonstrated the gesture, tugging gently at her own dark braids. Rex remained motionless except for his tail, which gave an almost imperceptible wag of encouragement, as if he understood the importance of Emma's revelations and wanted to comfort her as she bravely faced these difficult memories. Then Mommy came out of the bedroom and said, "Carlos, what's wrong? You're scaring Emma." But Daddy was so scared of the bad men that he thought Mommy was one of them for a minute. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper again. He grabbed Mommy's shoulders and shook her and said, "Where are they? Where are the bad men?" But Mommy didn't know about the bad men because Daddy never told her. The courtroom was riveted by this child's account, which was revealing layers of complexity that no one had suspected. Emma wasn't describing a calculated act of domestic violence, but rather a tragic collision between a desperate man's terror and his family's complete ignorance of the danger. They were all in. Mommy fell down and hit her head on the table, Emma said, her voice breaking with remembered pain. Daddy started crying and saying, I'm sorry, Maria. I didn't mean it." But Mommy wouldn't wake up, and Daddy got even more scared. As Emma continued to whisper her secrets to Rex, everyone in the courtroom realized they were witnessing not just unprecedented legal proceedings, but the unraveling of a tragedy far more complex than anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Chun's phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., pulling her from the first decent sleep she'd had in weeks. The caller ID showed Da Torres' office, and she knew immediately that Emma's testimony had changed everything. As she listened to Torres explain the bombshell revelations from the courtroom, Chun felt that familiar surge of adrenaline that came with major case developments. By 3:30 a.m., she was dressed and heading to the police station, her mind already racing through the investigative steps that would need to happen before dawn. The Rodriguez case had just exploded into something far more complex and dangerous than nice anyone had imagined. Emma's innocent words to Rex had revealed that Carlos Rodriguez wasn't a simple domestic abuser. He was a desperate man caught in the deadly web of illegal money lending, terrorized by threats against his family's safety. Sean knew that if Emma's account was accurate, they weren't just dealing with a domestic violence case anymore. They were looking at loan sharking, criminal coercion, and possibly organized crime. Chun's first stop was the Financial Crimes Unit, where Detective Marcus Williams was already pulling Carlos Rodriguez's banking records. The preliminary findings were startling. Carlos had withdrawn $8,000 in cash over the past 3 months, all in small increments that suggested he was trying to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements. His credit cards were maxed out, and there were numerous overdraft fees indicating someone living in severe financial distress. "Look at this," Williams said, pointing to a series of transactions on his computer screen. Starting 6 months ago, Carlos began making regular cash deposits of exactly $500 every 2 weeks. Then suddenly, 3 months ago, the deposits stopped and the withdrawals began. Classic pattern of someone who got in deep with loan sharks and couldn't keep up with the payments. Chun studied the financial timeline, noting how it coincided with what Emma had revealed about her mother's previous illness. Emma mentioned that her father said all their money went to medical bills. Maria Rodriguez had cervical cancer last year. I remember seeing it in the background check. Those treatment costs could easily have bankrupted a family without adequate insurance. The investigation gained momentum as Chan contacted Maria Rodriguez's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Huang, who confirmed that the family had indeed faced crushing medical debt. Carlos was desperate to get his wife the best possible treatment, Dr. Huang explained during an early morning phone call. When their insurance coverage proved inadequate, he insisted on paying for experimental treatments out of pocket. I tried to discuss financial assistance programs with him, but he was convinced that money was the only thing standing between his wife and death. Armed with this information, Sean began tracing the source of Carlos's cash deposits. Bank surveillance footage from 6 months earlier showed him meeting regularly with a man later identified as Vincent "Vinny" Torino, a known associate of the Marconi crime family. Torino had convictions for illegal gambling and loan sharking, and his presence in Carlos's life painted a clear picture of how a desperate husband had become entangled with dangerous criminals. The breakthrough came when Sean located Carlos's cell phone records and discovered dozens of calls to and from unlisted numbers in the weeks leading up to the attack on Maria. Cross-referencing these numbers with known criminal associates, she identified a pattern of escalating harassment. The calls became more frequent as Carlos fell behind on his payments, sometimes occurring multiple times per day in the final week before the incident. At 8:45 a.m., Sean received the call she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. St. Mary's Hospital reported that Maria Rodriguez had awakened from her coma. When Sean arrived at the ICU, she found a pale but alert woman whose first words were not about her own condition, but about her daughter's safety. "Where is Emma? Is she safe?" Maria asked, her voice hoarse from weeks of medical intervention. When Sean assured her that Emma was staying with her grandmother and was physically unharmed, Maria began to cry not from pain, but from relief. As Maria's strength returned over the next few hours, Chun gently questioned her about the family's financial situation. Maria's responses confirmed Emma's account in heartbreaking detail. "Carlos never told me about the money problems," Maria admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I knew he was stressed about my medical bills, but I thought we were managing. He worked extra shifts, took on weekend jobs, did everything he could to hide how bad things had gotten." Maria's account of the night of the attack aligned perfectly with Emma's testimony. Carlos had been acting strange for weeks, looking over his shoulder, checking locks, jumping at every phone call. That night, he was pacing the house like a caged animal. When I went to comfort him, he grabbed me and started shaking me, demanding to know where they were. He was terrified, Sarah. I'd never seen him like that. His eyes were wild, like he wasn't really seeing me at all. The tragic climax came when Maria described how Carlos, in his panic-stricken state, had mistaken her attempt to calm him for some kind of threat. He pushed me away so hard that I lost my balance and fell backward. My head hit the corner of the coffee table. She touched the bandages covering her healing wounds. The last thing I remember was Carlos screaming my name and calling 911. Chun's investigation revealed that the loan sharks had been escalating their threats systematically. Phone records showed that they had called Carlos's house the night of the incident, threatening to visit his pretty wife and little girl if payment wasn't received within 24 hours. Neighbors confirmed seeing unfamiliar cars parked on the street in the days leading up to the attack, and one resident had photographed a license plate that traced back to another known Marconi associate. By noon, Chun had assembled enough evidence to present to Torres and Judge Williams. The case against Carlos Rodriguez for domestic violence was crumbling, replaced by a complex federal investigation into the criminal enterprise that had terrorized his family into financial ruin and driven a desperate father to the breaking point. The most shocking revelation came when Chun discovered that Maria's cancer treatment had been successful. The experimental therapy that Carlos had bankrupted his family to afford had actually saved his wife's life. The loan sharks had been bleeding money from a man whose greatest crime was loving his wife enough to risk everything for her survival. As federal agents prepared arrest warrants for Vinny Torino and his associates, Chun reflected on how a 3-year-old girl's whispered conversation with a therapy dog had unraveled a criminal conspiracy and revealed the truth about a tragedy that was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The federal courthouse buzzed with controlled chaos as U.S. Attorney Jennifer Castillo coordinated the largest organized crime takedown the district had seen in decades. Emma Rodriguez's innocent conversation with Rex had set in motion a chain of events that would dismantle a criminal empire built on the desperation of vulnerable families. The investigation that began with a 3-year-old's whispered words to a therapy dog had grown into Operation Family Shield, targeting the Marconi organization's loan sharking network that had terrorized dozens of families across 3 states. At 6 a.m. on a crisp January morning, federal agents simultaneously raided 12 locations across the city. Vincent Vinny Torino was arrested at his luxury penthouse apartment, where agents discovered detailed records of his victims, including photographs of their homes and family members, evidence of the surveillance and intimidation tactics that had driven Carlos Rodriguez to his breaking point. The safe in Torino's office contained nearly $400,000 in cash, representing the life savings of families who had been trapped in cycles of impossible debt. Detective Sarah Chun stood in the Federal Task Force Command Center, watching multiple arrest operations unfold on wall-mounted monitors. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. The Marconi organization had been operating for over a decade, targeting families facing medical crises, job losses, and other financial emergencies. Their interest rates were astronomical, often exceeding 300% annually, and their collection methods included threats of violence, vandalism, and intimidation that had driven several victims to suicide. The Rodriguez case was just the tip of the iceberg, explained FBI Special Agent Maria Santos as she reviewed evidence seized from Torino's operations. We've identified at least 47 families who were victimized by this organization. Carlos Rodriguez was actually one of the lucky ones. He only owed them $25,000. Some families were trapped in debt cycles exceeding $100,000 for original loans of just a few $1,000s. The evidence against the loan sharks was overwhelming. Recorded phone calls revealed the systematic psychological torture they inflicted on their victims. In one particularly chilling recording, Torino could be heard telling Carlos, "That's a pretty little girl you got there, Rodriguez. Be a shame if something happened to her on the way to school." Another recording captured threats against Maria's life, with specific references to her cancer treatment and suggestions that her medications might be accidentally contaminated. Back at the county courthouse, A. Torres was working with federal prosecutors to ensure that Carlos Rodriguez received the justice he deserved. The domestic violence charges had been dropped entirely, replaced with a plea agreement for misdemeanor assault that would result in community service and mandatory counseling rather than prison time. Given the extraordinary circumstances and Carlos's status as a victim of criminal coercion, the judge had agreed to a sentence that prioritized rehabilitation and family reunification over punishment. The transformation in Carlos himself was remarkable. When Chun visited him in county lockup to inform him of his impending release, she found a man who looked as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I thought I was protecting my family by staying silent about the threats," Carlos said, tears of relief streaming down his face. "I never imagined that trying to hide our problems would lead to me hurting the person I love most in the world." Carlos's reunion with his family took place in the hospital room where Maria was continuing her recovery. Emma, now more talkative than she had been since before the incident, ran to her father's arms with a joy that moved even the stoic federal agents providing security. "Daddy, Rex told me you were coming home," she exclaimed, her small face radiant with happiness. "He said the bad men can't hurt us anymore." Dr. Amanda Foster, who had been working with Emma throughout the ordeal, marveled at the child's resilience. "Emma has processed this trauma in a remarkably healthy way," she explained to the reunited family. Her ability to speak to Rex about her memories allowed her to externalize the fear and begin healing. She understands that her daddy was scared and made a mistake, but that he's not a bad person. That distinction is crucial for her emotional development. The impact of Emma's courage extended far beyond her own family. Officer Rex had become something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles, with requests pouring in from jurisdictions across the country seeking to implement similar therapy dog programs. The Rodriguez Protocol was being developed as a standardized approach for working with traumatized child witnesses, combining animal-assisted therapy with innovative legal procedures. Rex himself seemed to understand his newfound fame with characteristic canine humility. When a local news crew was permitted to film a brief segment about his role in the case, with Emma's face obscured to protect her privacy, the German Shepherd simply sat calmly beside Officer Sullivan, occasionally glancing toward the camera with what appeared to be mild interest in the proceedings. The financial recovery for the Rodriguez family came through the Federal Asset Forfeiture Program. The money seized from Torino's organization was being used to compensate victims, and the Rodriguez family received not only the $25,000 that Carlos had borrowed, but additional funds to cover the medical expenses that had started their nightmare. Maria's cancer remained in remission, and the family's health insurance had been upgraded through a victim assistance program. Perhaps most importantly, the psychological healing was beginning for all three family members. Carlos was attending counseling sessions with Dr. Foster, learning healthy coping strategies for financial stress and trauma. Maria was working with a support group for families affected by organized crime, sharing her story to help other victims understand that they weren't alone. And Emma continued her weekly visits with Rex, their bond serving as a source of strength and comfort as she processed her experiences. 3 months after the arrests, Emma stood before a congressional subcommittee on victims' rights, with Rex by her side and her parents watching proudly from the gallery. At 5 years old, she had become the youngest person ever to address Congress about criminal justice reform. Her testimony, delivered in her clear, innocent voice while she petted Rex's head, would lead to the passage of the Family Protection Act, providing federal funding for therapy dog programs in courtrooms nationwide. Rex helped me be brave when I was scared, Emma told the assembled lawmakers. Now he can help other kids be brave too. Sometimes grown-ups need to listen to what kids say, even if we're little. We see things too. The heroes of this extraordinary case had found their voices, and their courage was creating a legacy that would protect vulnerable families for generations to come. 2 years had passed since that transformative December morning when 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez first whispered her secrets to a gentle German shepherd in a hushed courtroom. Now 5 years old and radiating confidence, Emma stood once again before a packed federal courthouse, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. The scared little girl who had once hidden in a closet had become a symbol of courage, whose story had changed the landscape of victim advocacy and criminal justice across America. The final trial in the Marconi organization case was concluding, and Emma had been called as a witness in the federal prosecution of the Loan Shark Ring's top leadership. Vincent Torino and 12 of his associates faced sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years in federal prison. The evidence against them was overwhelming, built upon the foundation that Emma's initial testimony to Rex had provided. As she entered the courtroom with Rex by her side, now a familiar and comforting routine, Emma carried herself with a poise that amazed everyone who remembered her first appearance. The U.S. Attorney, Jennifer Castillo, had worked closely with Dr. Foster to ensure that Emma's testimony would be both effective and psychologically safe. The courtroom had been modified once again, this time with advanced video technology that allowed Emma to testify from a comfortable witness room, while her image was projected to the jury and defense attorneys. Rex lay calmly beside her chair, his presence providing the same stabilizing influence that had unlocked her voice 2 years earlier. Emma, do you remember the scary men your daddy was afraid of? Castillo asked gently, her voice carrying the same careful tone that had been perfected through the Rodriguez protocol training that was now mandatory for federal prosecutors handling cases involving child witnesses. Emma nodded confidently, her hand resting on Rex's head. Yes, they were the bad men who wanted to hurt my family because Daddy couldn't pay them money. But Rex helped me tell the truth, and now they can't hurt anybody else's families. Her testimony was brief, but devastating. To the defense, in simple, clear language that carried the unmistakable ring of truth, Emma described the fear that had consumed her household in those final weeks. She spoke about her father's tears, her mother's confusion, and the overwhelming terror that had driven a loving family to the breaking point. Most powerfully, she explained how Rex had made her feel safe enough to remember and share what she had witnessed. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. As the sentences were read terms that would effectively ensure the defendants spent the rest of their lives in federal prison, Emma watched from the witness room with her parents and Rex. When the final gavel fell, she looked up at Officer Sullivan and said simply, "Good. Now other kids won't be scared like I was." The impact of Emma's case had rippled far beyond the criminal justice system. The Family Protection Act, inspired by her congressional testimony, had allocated $50 million in federal funding for therapy animal programs in courthouses nationwide. Over 200 therapy dogs like Rex were now working with traumatized witnesses across America, and the Rodriguez Protocol had been adopted by legal systems in 12 countries. Dr. Foster had become a leading expert in animal-assisted therapy for legal proceedings, consulting on cases from domestic violence to human trafficking. Her research, built upon the groundbreaking work she had done with Emma and Rex, showed that child witnesses who worked with therapy animals were 73% more likely to provide complete testimony and showed significantly lower rates of secondary trauma from the legal process. Officer Mark Sullivan had been promoted to lieutenant and now oversaw the regional canine therapy program that he and Rex had pioneered. Rex, despite being officially retired from active duty, continued to work with select cases, always those involving the youngest and most vulnerable witnesses. The bond between the German Shepherd and Emma had become legendary within law enforcement circles, a testament to the healing power of the human-animal connection. The Rodriguez family had found their new normal in a way that honored both their trauma and their healing. Carlos worked as a financial counselor with a non-profit organization, Second Chances, helping families navigate financial crises without falling prey to predatory lenders. His first-hand experience with loan sharks made him uniquely qualified to spot the warning signs and provide alternatives. Maria had become a victim advocate, working specifically with families dealing with medical debt, the very crisis that had originally led to their victimization. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Emma herself. Now a kindergartner with an infectious laugh and boundless energy, she had channeled her experience into helping other children facing similar trauma. With Rex by her side, she visited elementary schools as part of a safety education program, teaching children about speaking up when they felt afraid and showing them that even scary situations could have hopeful endings. Rex taught me that it's okay to be scared sometimes. Emma would tell groups of wide-eyed children during these visits. But when you have friends who love you, you can be brave enough to tell the truth. And telling the truth helps keep everyone safe. The therapy dog program had expanded beyond criminal cases. Rex and his growing team of canine colleagues now worked with children in family court proceedings, custody disputes, and even academic settings where students had experienced trauma. The success rate was remarkable, with over 90% of children who worked with therapy dogs showing improved communication and emotional regulation. Emma's weekly visits with Rex had evolved from therapy sessions into genuine friendship. Every Saturday afternoon, she would arrive at the police station with homemade cookies from her grandmother Rosa, settling into the special reading corner that had been created in Rex's area. There, she would read books to him, tell him about her week at school, and share the normal joys and concerns of a child whose life had found its balance again. On a sunny Saturday in May, as Emma celebrated her 6th birthday with a party that included Rex as the guest of honor, she made a wish. That surprised the adults around her. Instead of wishing for toys or treats, she wished for all the scared kids to find their own Rex, so they can be brave too. As the years passed, that wish was steadily coming true. Emma Rodriguez's courage in speaking to a therapy dog had created a legacy that would protect countless children for generations to come. The scared little girl who had once hidden in a closet had become a beacon of hope, proving that even the smallest voices can change the world when they find the courage to speak their truth. In courtrooms across America, therapy dogs now wait patiently beside witness stands, ready to provide the same gift that Rex had given Emma: the safety to remember, the courage to speak, and the healing power of unconditional love. The revolution that began with whispered secrets between a traumatized child and a gentle German Shepherd had become a movement that transformed how society protects its most vulnerable members. Emma Rodriguez and Rex had shown the world that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of compassion. And that truth, no matter how difficult, always finds a way to surface when love creates a safe space for it to emerge.